guys, and welcome back once more to Axanon Gamers. Today we're gonna gush and recommend a really cool game for all of you. It's Shadow Hearts on the PS2. Shadow Hearts is a great JRPG that I was hesitant to pick up in the beginning, and I'm gonna tell you guys straight off why. When I was younger, I was looking into this game as well. I heard some good things about it, but I was always turned off by the ugly CG cover. And I must say, my opinion on that changed. I actually got the Japanese cover here because it was much more elegant and sleek. It had this really white background and just a logo on top. But now that I play the game and I've fallen in love with the characters, I actually miss them on the box. But luckily for me, I still have them on the back.
One of the most fascinating things about Shadow Hearts is its story and themes. It deals with some really macabre and morbid settings. The stakes become even higher when you realize that the world it's set in is our world, just before the brink of the First World War. It's filled with political intrigue, but even so you find yourself more involved with the occult more than anything. Not only did I enjoy the story, but I also loved how the story was structured. It was very segmented and you had little to no incentive to backtrack in the first part of the game. The most convenient thing about how the game was set up was that you were able to progress from one unique area to another, almost like levels in a platforming game, which made it perfectly easy to keep tab on where you were, would you look up a guide or anything. Each of the new areas usually came with a new subplot that, while connected to the overall plot, also were really interesting in their own right. The game starts off really strong, placing you in a demonic village filled with cannibals, and then takes you to places like vampires' castles. It tells wicked ghost stories about ghosts that are stuck in limbo, who have had their voices swapped with their family members. It's truly bizarre stuff that I haven't seen explored in video games before, or most other mediums for that matter. Rest assured, it's really awesome stuff. As far as characters go, you are accompanied by a very eclectic cast, ranging from a Chinese sage, a French spy, a vampire, a British daughter of a priest, and Yuri, our loudmouthed anti-hero, who often gets migraines, all of them which ooze with undeniable charm. Many of them appear in the second game as well, which will be really interesting to see how they develop them further. It feels like, unlike a lot of different JRPGs, they wrote these characters with personalities in mind, rather than just stereotypical traits. I absolutely had a blast with Yuri. He was like an introvert young Dante from Devil May Cry 3. Instead of being rocking and smashing, he was sassy and played stuff off cool. Plus, he could trigger various demon transformations. His analysis growing love relationship was also one of the strongest aspects of the story that made you want to discover how they'd interact next. The adventure overall feels like a tightly written 90s anime with some dark 80s OVA twists. It's just really gruesome and awesome to check out, and I just loved every moment of it. Some of the things that hooked me immediately about the game was its clever implementations of various sort of systems. The malice system is probably the mechanic you should keep your most watchful eye on. Every time you go into battle, you'll accumulate malice. To rid yourself of malice, you need to enter a very important arena to fight it off. If you don't, you'll be forced to face off against an ultra-powerful enemy. From a gameplay perspective, getting into these rigged fights only halts your progression. But I also thought it was a really cool way for the game to implement some story aspects, since the demons you fight also have a deep connection to Yuri's past and won't stop haunting him until he reaches his solution. It's a curse that's not only set upon him, but also on you as a player who actively has to find a way to manage the increase of malice. And so I thought the game was also really genius in breaking the fourth wall. I really did feel for Yuri and I actually felt his pain by going through all of these really tough battles with him. You also have the sanity points, which in battle represents the lingering touch of sanity that the characters have left from fighting a bunch of creepy monsters. When you depleted your SP meter, your characters will go berserk, rendering them uncontrollable. I remember there were a ton of fights where I lost very abruptly and unfairly because I forgot to pay attention to the SP meter for one of my characters, while the other two of my party members were petrified, which automatically made me lose, of course. It was a fantastic way to keep the players on their toes, and a very playful mechanic to add in the end of the day. The Judgment Ring is by far the most crucial addition to the game, and it's most likely a staple of the series as a whole. The Judgment Ring is a clock-like shape that appears whenever you perform a certain action outside or inside battle. It is a system that requires players to actively press button commands in order to successfully perform actions for better or for worse. If you manage to press the button at just the right time, you will be rewarded with greater effects for your action of choice. The Judgment Ring made me pay much more closer attention to the fights in the game. Just like a lot of Mario RPGs, it adds a layer of fun to the fights, which involves the players on more levels than just choosing a specific command and letting the gameplay itself. I loved how the developers embraced the Judgment Ring and made it such a core part of the game. You can affect it in so many ways by either changing the size of the hitboxes, changing the rotation speed of the clock, and so much more. It made me feel like I was in perfect control of my customization of my character. Different spells had me do different button presses, while other details I could fully control on my own. Messing up a time press would just be another way of missing, which amplified the weight of a choice. Outside just beating enemies, there was also another great system that allowed you to gain more power. This mechanic is related to Yuri's special power, and by defeating enemies of different elements, you can gain access to new demon transformations to allow for more control to the player, to fully shape his or her way of playing the game. The way I would customize Yuri was to give him a transformation of the fire element, which would boost his attack along with equipment that would make him faster and buff his attack strength in exchange of making the judgment ring go faster and make me miss more often. But it allowed me to hit much more often and become twice as effective with the damage dealt. It actually carried me throughout most of the game until one specific boss. But my point is that I could approach it very personally, which was fantastic, and it gave me the realization that there were so many ways for players to use this system and actually make it personal for themselves. I find it simply wondrous how I once again find another developer that goes out of its way to bring its world to life the way they do in Shadow Hearts. They do it through what you'd think would be insignificant details such as some reappearing characters or lesser information of text found in the game. But in fact, a lot of these touches actually add a lot more than you'd think. For example, the creators decided to add a lot more extra thought to the enemies and the items in this game to help embellish the game world and enrich the overall experience, in that they add very short but also colorful descriptions of the items and the enemies that definitely give you a new appreciation of the game after you read them. When reading about your typical healing items and your enemy bios, you'll find that it doesn't just say stuff like, this item heals for 100 HP, or this enemy is weak to darkness. There's definitely more to it. Instead of just getting these generic descriptions of how the items are used, you actually get a lot of details and some captivating story about how the item was made, for example. And even though there's a lot of regular and formal descriptive text, there's also some sentences that they put in about the items and its mystical creation that manage to get you excited to read about an item the moment you get it, rather than just treating it as another throwaway expendable. And even at the times it actually does outline the use of the item or the enemy from a gameplay standpoint, it does it in a way that gives insight to the lore of the world of the game. And my nerdy side just went bonkers when I found out that they actually drew individual art for each item. While the game feels sort of dated with muddy textures and recycled enemies, the art direction makes up for it with a lot of bone-chilling monster designs and amazing pre-rendered backdrops. And I actually just play Yuri's running animation off for laughs. The game definitely looks like something more in lines of a high-budget PS1 title such as Final Fantasy VIII, more than it does a PS2 title, but considering how it was released sometime before Final Fantasy X, it shouldn't come as a surprise. The music is also excellent in-game. It has a very ethnical industrial sound, but I could not imagine listening to it outside the game. I feel really conflicted about that because the music is beyond fantastic and it definitely fits the game, but without the setting to support it, I can't really enjoy it as much. The game is excellent at adding those very small details that truly define the experience. Small things such as subtle animation changes for Yuri when he transforms after reaching his conclusion, and when at one point the game pulls a fake out and almost lets the bad guy join your party, and then it just stops you dead in your tracks to tell you it's tricked you. It's such a joy to experience. The game was actually preceded by a game called Koudelka, which was made by the same developers, and although I owned Koudelka before owning Shadow Hearts, I actually never got around to play it. While there were some major elements from Koudelka carried over to Shadow Hearts, the connection between the plots feel extremely thin, and the fact that I didn't know about the events that transpired in Koudelka before playing Shadow Hearts never really got in the way of my enjoyment of playing Shadow Hearts. In fact, the surprise reveal of certain characters from Koudelka actually came to me as a pleasant shock, and I thought the way they implemented the characters worked perfectly fine as part of the story in the game, and almost felt practically detached from the other title. I'm still really interested to see how things would fit together once I actually get to play Koudelka. And speaking of reoccurring characters, in other Shadow Hearts game, you seem to fight against different colored bats as optional bosses. These bats are actually part of the same family, of which members will wind up in your party over the course of the series, which means in each title, you'll be appointed with a new vampire character, which I find is an extremely clever way to help the series keep its continuity. They introduced a subject that won't really become important until the next game, and even though I didn't find the vampire of this game to be entirely exciting, I do look forward to see what they plan to do with this in the future installments. The game puts a lot of its optional content in the end of the game, which was really welcoming. There were actually many points of the game where I could actually run straight to the end, but the amount of satisfaction you got from completing one of the side quests was just phenomenal. Hearing Alice's true thoughts about Yuri and completing her side quests to get the best ending is something I highly recommend. Moreover, there's a detail that I think a lot of people will think is interesting. There's actually a time skip in the middle of the game, which takes you 6 months after the first part. And that's really cool because it's almost like you get a sequel in one game. Not to mention that this game actually has an official direct sequel, so yeah.
It is painful to admit that this kind of game has been shrouded in the clouds of time, and considering how many people actually look for these kind of games, I'm surprised it doesn't come up in discussions much more often. Overshadowed by its contemporaries back in the day, I think we should give this game the proper attention it deserves today. Shadow Hearts is a unique blend of dark and irreverent material that makes for a great experience that you can't find anywhere else. It's gonna be enjoyed by all JRPG gamers, but truly beloved by the devoted fans of the genre. Shadow Hearts has a lot of those classical elements found in the best of JRPGs, while also mixing things up with stuff like the Judgment Ring system. It adds a lot of outlandish humor and characters and dark material. So from me to you, I really hope that Shadow Hearts can cast a shadow on your heart as well. Anyway, you guys, until next time, get gaming.